Well, it's good to be with you this evening. My name is Tom Brink, and I was part of this project that we're going to discuss tonight. Worked on it with Gardiner Angus Ranch and Zoetis, and this is the second research project that I've had the privilege to work with Gardiner Angus on. This particular project we started a little over 2 years ago. It's called the Technology Two-Step Project. Pretty interesting, I think, in terms of the design and the results. And so we're going to focus on that tonight. I do want to kind of go back in time just a little bit here and talk about another project that we also completed a couple of years ago that some of you that were at this meeting 2 years ago heard. But let's talk a little bit first about what's going on in our markets. The cattle industry is obviously in a very good place. We're seeing record high prices on all classes of cattle. This particular chart that I'm showing you now tracks weekly average prices for different weight groups and classes of cattle from January 2013 up till now, kind of toward the end of September this year. And we've been making new highs just almost every week, and the level that prices have reached, pretty phenomenal. I don't think many of us would have ever guessed that we could be selling cattle for where we are today, and demand has been good. We know supply is down. Supplies are down sharply. Beef production is down significantly this year, but also demand has been good, and that's part of it as well. So the beef industry is in a good place. Supplies are small, as we've said. Demand is good, both domestically and internationally, and these prices are record high. Costs are also coming down. Finally, we've had pretty good moisture around most areas of the country, and forage prices, number one, there's more forage available, and prices are coming down compared to the last few years finally, and that's going to help us as well. So 2014 is one of those very unique years when all segments of the cattle business are profitable at once, and not only are they profitable, the level of profitability is pretty much unprecedented in all the segments, whether you're in the cow-calf business, the cattle feeding business, or it's a stocker enterprise, or some of all of those. Been a very, very good year. So that's excellent. It's helping us all. And also I would throw in this comment that the value creation and value capture opportunities in this business have never been better. So if you're producing superior cattle with excellent genetics, and they go on through the supply chain, hang up a good carcass, there's never been a better time to capture value on those high-end genetics. And I think we know more about what really does create value, and we know more about the genetics that will do it, just like those produced here at Gardiner Angus Ranch, and that's helping us all as well. You know, all good research starts with a question. And when we did the Southern Carcass Improvement Project a few years back, you can see these pictures, a couple of southern-oriented cattle that were part of that project. That project did also start out with a question, and the question was, how much improvement in both feed yard and carcass value could be made by using high-end Angus sires on traditional southern cows, traditional southern genetics, in one generation. So we really wanted to see if you just take kind of generic southern genetics, generic southern cows, use very high-end Angus sires on those cows, how much progress can we make in one generation? And the answer was we can make a lot of progress. That was really the bottom line. But these Angus sires did a lot of things well. They added marbling, they added muscle, they improved average daily gain, they added carcass weight, and significantly larger grid premiums. And the net economic advantage, as you see here on the slide, was $73 per head versus the southern sires after all things were accounted for. And of course that's when the markets were considerably lower than they are today. If that study was redone, or those numbers were applied to today's market, the value would probably be well over $100 a head. And so significant progress in one generation we found using those very high-end Angus sires on traditional southern cows. So very successful project, very interesting project, kind of unique in what it accomplished. Here's a few pictures of some of the cattle that were part of that project. some southern by southern cattle here, cattle that you see a lot of this type coming out of the southern part of the country, and they tend to not grade very well, which was the point of the project. And then the next slide here, you see the first cross, the F1 cattle, if you will. They were Angus by these southern genetics. Pretty attractive cattle, and of course did really well in terms of how they fed and how they graded and how they earned significant premiums on the grid. So that project was really one that was very interesting, very successful. Another slide on that real quickly shows the bell curve being shifted to the right. This is on quality grade, and the orange bars here, the yellow, kind of yellow-orange bars, are the southern sired genetics, and then the black ones are the Angus sired. And if you kind of look at that a little bit, you can just see in quality grade, various quality grades along the horizontal axis of this chart, you can kind of see that bell curve being shifted significantly to the right in a positive direction with higher quality grades, and that's what the Angus genetics accomplished. So very successful that way. Here is another slide that I think I was probably felt as good about this one as we put the information together and just what the project accomplished. I like this slide, and it's something that I felt really good about. You look at the middle part of this slide, this would have been the average prime and choice quality grades for Texas, Kansas, and Nebraska. And of course the northern areas tend to grade higher versus the southern areas, and the reason is more of these southern genetics primarily. The over on the far left hand side, kind of that yellowish bar, was the Southern Carcass Improvement Southern by Southern genetics, and so we were able to duplicate the problem. We were able to kind of replicate what the problem is. Those cattle only graded 25% choice, which would be not uncommon with traditional southern genetics. And yet the first generation Angus cross on the southern genetics, clear over here, the gray bar on the right side, and it was actually higher than the state of Nebraska, the average for the state of Nebraska, a higher grading area, of course. So we jumped from the very low end, in fact below the Texas average, to above the Nebraska average in one generation. So that kind of gives the perspective of how much progress can be made pretty fast using the right genetics, in this case very high-end Angus genetics. And so a very successful project. So I want to tip my hat to Gardiner Angus Ranch for investing in these projects, both the Southern Carcass Improvement Project and the current one that we're going to discuss. I mean, this is meaningful research that we can all learn from, and I think we want to always continue to learn to create more value in the industry, to benefit the industry, and we've got some great tools to do that now with the genetic tools available to us. But again, thank you to Gardiner Angus Ranch for helping us all learn. Let's go then to the Technology Two-Step Project. As I mentioned, this was the latest project that we're involved in with Gardiner Angus Ranch and Zoetis. We appreciate Zoetis being part of this project as well. We nicknamed this project, if you will, the Technology Two-Step, because we wanted to determine, the question here is how much progress can be made in one generation by combining two relatively proven genetic technologies. And so DNA testing was one of them, and then coupled that to AI, to some very high growth, very high carcass value Angus sires, some high-end Gardiner Angus Ranch sires. So AI technology, of course, has been around for a while. These more modern Angus genetics are really leading edge, so that was one piece of technology. And then DNA testing, though it has been around for a while, still fairly new. So the project goal of this effort was to increase marbling and grid premium potential, starting from a cow base, and this is kind of an important part of it, that was just average or even below average for genetic marbling potential. So the focus was, we want to create premium cattle. We want to create cattle that can earn a significant premium on the grid, and we want to do that starting from a cow base that is average at best, if not even a little bit below average. And so then the research methods, how we started out, we did source 104 yearling heifers from one Texas ranch. You're going to see a picture of those heifers in just a minute. They may look like a put together set, but because they're kind of multicolored heifers a little bit, but they were from One Texas Ranch. We bought those heifers in April of 2012. These heifers were not expected to be strong for marbling and quality grade potential. We were pretty confident, just knowing what we knew about them in advance, that they had not been selected for carcass traits much at all, and that actually proved out to be very true. Then what we did, after we purchased those heifers, we DNA tested all of those heifers using a Zoetis carcass panel that is suitable for crossbred cattle. And once we got those results, we took the heifers in the bottom third for DNA marbling potential, and we culled those heifers. And we eliminated them from the project. We did not breed them, but the top 2/3 that showed a little more marbling potential based on the DNA analysis, we did breed those heifers then AI to a couple of very high growth, high carcass Gardiner Angus Ranch sires. And we'll talk more about and provide the details of that as we go through here. But then the resulting calves, okay, we bred the heifers, we calved them out. The resulting calves were managed in a very traditional fashion. We also did DNA test the calves, and then they went on feed in southwest Kansas with Sam Hands at Triangle H. They went on feed in the fall of 2013 around Thanksgiving time, and then were harvested in June of this year. So that's basically a quick overview of the project, and now let's start into a little more detail.
Now here's a picture, if you can see this, and I hope you can see this. This is a picture of the heifers, okay? This is a picture of those females that we purchased when they were on wheat in Oklahoma. And what you can see there, if you can see these pictures, there is quite a bit of continental influence, especially Charolais. There's no real blacks in the group. There's a few reds and red baldies. That was the group, okay? And we selected this group, as I mentioned, off of One Texas Ranch. There was a reason that we selected the heifers that we did. We felt like this pool of genetics would be basically unselected and lower than average for marbling. Okay, so we're starting from a cow base here. At least our assumption was, or our initial effort was, to find a female base that would be at best industry average, if not below industry average for marbling. As it turned out, they were. They were exactly that. The Zoetis work, the DNA scores for MVP showed that they were a minus 21. Okay, so they were below industry average. Industry average, Jason would tell you, is about 0. These heifers as a group, all 104 head, were minus 20, or a little worse than minus 20. So they were below industry average. But, of course, we eliminated the bottom third worst offenders. And again, if you can see this chart, here's how it reads. I don't know if you can see this pointer or not, but I'm going to try to make it work. The bar on the far left is the minus 20 average for the entire group. The big negative bar in the middle with an X through it are the cull heifers. Those were the third with the lowest marbling scores, okay? And they were about minus 50, a little worse than minus 50. And then that bar farthest to the right that is circled, that's what we had left. Okay, so after culling the worst offenders, we had 2/3 left, and they were close to industry average, a little bit below, but close to industry average. So certainly the DNA technology helped us a lot in identifying heifers that were, in making a group that was very negative, not so negative to build on, okay? And from there, here's just a picture of one heifer that had a pretty good score. Just to give you an example, we did have some heifers that would be above industry average. This red baldy heifer had an MVP score of nearly 31, so there's something to build on. So we had some like that, but again, the keeper group that we bred on average would have been just right around 0 or even a little bit below. Now here's the 2 sires that we used. Again, 2 sires that I think everybody is familiar with here. Profit and Progress. Those 2 sires would be in the top 5% of the breed for calving ease, and yet the top 1% for Dollar B. And so what you have here, of course, and these were virgin heifers, so we were breeding them to bulls that had high-end calving ease, and yet also a lot of end product value in terms of growth, marbling potential, and carcass traits. So those are the 2 sires that we use. They are pretty elite sires. I will confess to that. I mean, if you're going to do a project like this and the semen costs the same, why not use the very best? And we did that. We basically did that, and we wanted to see how far we could move this in one generation. So top 5% for calving ease, top 1% for Dollar B. Now they did have some grass in southwest Kansas last year. If you can see this picture, it shows some of the research pairs last year at this time. Last year a little earlier, I think that was in midsummer 2013. You can see kind of what those cows turned into a little bit. You can see a little bit more about their background. I would say this, I did learn one thing. There was a little more ear represented in those females, a little more Brahmin influence or eared influence in their background than what you got looking at them first impression, because we saw that in some of the calves. But here's a couple of calves and some of the cows that you see there. And we actually did gene max the calves as well. We did gene max the calves. They were 50% Angus calves, so we used the gene max tool. Here's a couple of pretty high scoring gene max calves. Most of you would be familiar with the Zoetis gene max test that Jason was talking about. Score from 1 to 99. Of course, a higher score is better. A couple calves here that did pretty well, being in the low 90s. Given their background, they scored pretty well. So there's that. And then now let's show you a couple other pictures, if you can see these, of the calves. This is shortly after weaning. You can see there's a lot of the Charolais diluter gene present, which worked against us come the CAB count after they were harvested. You can see some black calves there, but a lot of black noses because, of course, these are all Angus sired calves. Here's another one. Here's another picture kind of similar. And you can just get an idea. There's a bald ear or two in there. You can get an idea of what those calves look like coming out of what the female base that they came from, plus profit and progress. I think Mark would say that these, I don't know where Mark is right now, but I think Mark would say, and probably some of the ranch crew would say, these females were not the easiest females to work with. I think the ranch we got them off of they were pretty big, wide open, kind of running heifers that didn't get a lot of human contact, and so there were some interesting experiences with that. But you get an idea of what the calves look like. Let me show you just a few of the highlights, and this is when the cattle are getting close to finish. A few more pictures here. Here's a steer that was, and he's actually one of them that I just showed you the gene max score on. He was the steer on the right. This steer had the second highest value carcass in the group, so pretty highly valuable steer there. And here's another steer that had even though he's white, he's a progress sired steer, and he had a gene max score of 99. Okay. Now, if you're a feed yard guy like me, or Tom Jones, or Sam, or some of the rest of us in the room here, and you see steers that look like that, especially with a gene max score like that, you're going to say, fill my pens with those. Fill my pens with those. I mean, that steer looks like a stud, and he was a stud. And here's another picture right there in the middle, if you can see that, when he was getting closer to finish. I mean, that's a good kind of a steer there, and those couple to the right of him don't look too bad either. So I can always enjoy looking at pictures of cattle that look like that. I've got a couple more here. Here happens to be a progress sired heifer, black baldy. A nice thing about this heifer is she graded prime. She graded prime with 0.6 of an inch of back fat. That is about industry average today. If you didn't know that, industry average would be somewhere today around 5, and I would say probably closer to 0.6. So here's a heifer that graded prime. Her carcass would have dollared up extremely well, would have helped the average of the group, and she's a pretty decent looking heifer as well, but there's a lot of value there. That would be a progress sired heifer. One more. I won't show too many pictures, but I like to show a few here. A pretty good looking steer here, lots of visual muscle on this steer, and he had nearly a 15-inch ribeye. Again, as a cattle feeder, I mean, those are the kind of cattle you like to fill your pens with. So some pretty nice results in one generation just looking at some of those cattle. But let's really get down to whether or not this project worked. Okay, we've talked about these two technologies. We've talked about how we used them, but did it really work in the real world? That's the question, right? The proof is where? The proof is in the progeny, what the progeny really did when we managed them traditionally and then we sent them on through the system like we would do with any cattle. Well, the results are, from a DNA standpoint, starting there, and we talked about the scores on the females, both before and after we culled the bottom end, but the progeny scored a plus 50, in fact, over 50. So this would be well above industry average. So in one generation, from a DNA standpoint, we now have an MVP marbling score that is well above average. And those dollar signs, at least you start to think about that. Here is the graph that shows, in a sense, the whole project, all right? This is really a key result from a genomic standpoint, from a DNA standpoint. And it shows what I already showed you, the heifers, the bar on the left is where we started, minus 20. The culls, minus 50. The heifers we bred, about a minus 4, so close to 0. That's the third bar over. And then the progeny. Look at the progeny, way above 0, as I mentioned, over plus 50. So in one generation, using these two technologies, now certainly genomically, we've had a big impact, haven't we? We've had a big impact in terms of the genetic or genomic marbling potential of these cattle. And the average, I've got one more statement on there, and that would be that the average gene max score on all the progeny was 82, a little over 82. So pretty good. You know, not as high as some of the individuals I showed you, but overall, coming from the cow base that they came from, that's pretty darn good. So we moved the dime a lot from a genomic standpoint. Now, I remember saying at the time, once we got these results, that I thought these cattle would do plus $70 to plus $90 per head on the grid. Now, where did I get that number? It was a wild guess. It was just a wild guess. I thought they would do pretty well, but of course I didn't know. None of us knew what they would do. We liked what we had seen from a genomic standpoint. We didn't know what they would do when we put them to the test, actually harvested the cattle, fed and harvested the cattle. Turns out I was what? Turns out I was way too conservative. Turns out I was quite conservative in terms of what these cattle actually did. Now here's one more chart, and I think this is a pretty interesting chart. This is the Zoetis MVP score for the original females, all 104 of them, that's the red bars, and then the same distribution for the progeny, and that's the blue bars, okay? Now I can tell everybody's had a little something, you know, to eat, and you're getting comfortable, and so I'm going to ask you all to just stand up. Now don't go anywhere, just stand up real quickly. Everybody just stand up and take a stretch. Okay? Now while you're standing, what I'm going to tell you is this is, and I'm going to use height, okay? This is an unselected population for height. See, I'm not that tall, and I happen to have guys standing right here in front of me, and if Joe stand up, they're all tall people, so that's embarrassing, right? But this is pretty much an unselected population for height, okay? Now that's what you see when you see those red bars here. That is an unselected population for marbling because it has a wide distribution and it's below average. Okay, you're starting to sit down, but I didn't tell you to sit down yet, okay? Now, if you are under 6 foot tall, please sit down, which I should sit down, okay? But I'm going to keep standing. If you're 6 foot tall or over, please keep standing. Now, what have you got here? We now have a selected population. We now have a selected population. It's been selected for something. And that's exactly, thank you, you can all sit down now. Thank you. That's exactly what we're seeing here. The blue bars are a what? They are a selected population because the bell curve is tighter and it's moved. We moved it. We moved it to above average. So we've gone from a largely unselected population to now, with the progeny in this project, a selected, very positive average, positive mean in the bell curve, but also a somewhat tighter bell curve. And that's exactly what I tried to demonstrate there, and hopefully you got a little blood flowing to the legs and whatnot too with that. So, but very successful result when you look at this project from a genomic standpoint. Now let's get down to the bottom line, and here it is. Here it is. How did those progeny do when we fed and harvested these progeny? And I'm not showing you the feed yard data here because we did feed these cattle as a group, as a mixed pen, steers and heifers together. So the gain and conversion and so forth, we really can't draw a lot of conclusion from that. But the carcass data we can. The carcass data is very meaningful. And look what these cattle did. Look what these cattle did. From an overall standpoint, they graded nearly 95% choice and above. So they smoked it on the grid, didn't they? They did extremely well. They actually absolutely followed what their genetics told them to do and what the DNA said they would do. Nearly 6% prime, 5.8% prime, Larry Cora, 35% CAB. And again, think about all the white hides we had in there. If we wouldn't have had so many white hides, that number would be even larger. But there were 35% certified Angus beef. I should mention, too, this was absolutely 100% of the calf crop. There were no cuts here. Okay, this is all of them, fed together. This is every calf that we had that survived to the feedlot. Okay, no heavy or light carcasses. And as these kind of cattle often do, they beat the base dressing percent on the grid by a little over 2%, 2 percentage points. And so if you're comparing to the live market, that's a really nice thing. That adds a lot of pounds. That adds value, especially with cattle prices where they are right now, okay? They did, bottom line, and this is what you really like when you're feeding cattle, is they brought back $113 over the average market the week they were sold in June. So very, very impressive result. And again, where did we start with here? What base of females did we start with? We started with an average to really below average group of females, an unselected population, okay? And we end up with cattle that do $113 a head on the grid. I see Brian Bertelson sitting over here. I didn't talk to Brian about this, but Brian, let's ask you a question. In the month of June, on USPB, which these cattle were sold in, what percentile ranking would these cattle have fallen in with that kind of a premium? Okay, if I heard him correctly here, and my wife who's here with me tonight would say I don't always hear that well. I tell her it's selective hearing, but she might argue differently. But I heard Brian say that would have been in the top 5%, maybe even higher than that, maybe even in the top 2 or 3%. And how fast did we do this? We did that in one generation. I think that's a tremendous result. I think that's a tremendous result. Again, these cattle were not fed naturally. They were implanted normally, and they were managed like we would manage just about any fed cattle through the system that we would see today. Sam did a great job feeding them, but again, managed just normally like he would at triangulates like he would manage any cattle. So tremendous result. So what we might do is almost rename this project, and if we did, we'd say taking the fast path to superior cattle values. It shows us, and I want you to really think a little bit about the information you've just seen, okay, and what that really means to anybody in this industry. And I know you guys sitting out here in this audience have a lot of good cows, okay? Your cows are way better, I have no doubt, than what we just showed you, the cow base that we started from, okay? But what does it really say to virtually anybody in the industry that wants to create value? They can use the tools and they can do it fast. It took us from start to finish. I'm impressed by this just because in cattle industry terms, this is pretty fast. It took us 2 years and 2 months to execute this project. That is not that long. That is not very long from a set of females below average, to cattle that ended up, from a grid premium standpoint, in the top 5%, maybe even better than that. So very, very good results. And it does tell us that these tools work. These available tools really work. Really work. The DNA testing is a big part of that, and certainly the genetics, the high-end Angus genetics, Progress and Profit in this specific case, did just a tremendous job. And so what we walk away from having learned from this project is we now know that it's possible to create very high-value cattle relatively fast. And I know most of you all know that, or you probably wouldn't be sitting here. But as a cattle feeder and having fed as many average and below average cattle and still seeing so many of those cattle produced by so many people in this industry, that's a big deal to me. That's a big deal to me because I now see what can be done. And again, it can be done fast. And also, if people have asked, okay, well, what does the DNA technology cost? We know what AI costs. What does the DNA technology cost? Well, GeneMax focused, if you have Angus-based females, is $17 a head. And once you test a female, then you know about her for her entire productive life. So that's a fairly cheap cost if you look at it from that standpoint. And so the tools really, really worked. I want to wrap up there, and I want to go to my next presentation in a minute, but Any questions or comments on this project? Anything that I didn't answer, anything that I didn't explain well, any question? Could any old Angus sire create that value? I don't think so, Mark. I don't think so. You know, and that's the whole point. I mean, that's the whole point here is for no different cost than any other old Angus sire out there, you can use the very best. I mean, that basically is the truth. That basically is the truth. And so why not create that much more value? So, you know, one thing we can't do, and I might have, who is going to switch out my bill? Thank you. Switch out my presentation here. I think, again, and I'm repeating myself a little bit, we walk away from this, I think, almost with a different viewpoint on what can be done in this industry. They're honestly, and I came to feel this way in the last few years that I was at JBS, and it is part of why I'm doing what I'm doing right now and starting Top Dollar Angus. There's almost getting to be no excuse for poor cattle anymore, because the tools are out there, the technology works. You can use the DNA technology, it works. You can use the genetics don't cost that much difference, and they work. And so you can create truly valuable cattle very fast, very efficiently today. And so, again, there's almost no excuse for, and I know a lot of our industry isn't here tonight to hear this, but unfortunately, but there really is getting to be no excuse for subpar cattle, because we have tools available in this industry to create very valuable cattle, again, very quickly. Yes, right here. Why is the rest of the industry not here? I wish more of them were. Some of them, as we know, don't really care or don't pay attention. But I think that, and some of them right now, and I've heard this and you all have heard this, prices are so high, some people are actually doing less management to their cattle. I mean, they're actually saying, well, you know, I'm not going to do a VAC 45 program this year because my cattle will bring a lot anyway. And, you know, that's very unfortunate to actually go backwards. But we also know one thing, too, that these prices aren't going to stay up forever. They may stay very good for a period of several years, and I think they will. I believe that. But they won't stay good forever. And so have we ever had a better time to make improvement? While we have a few extra, as producers, we have a few extra dollars in our pockets. Do some things in your herd, and that's why you're here, to make long-term improvements. So when prices go back down, your prices will stay up. Your prices will stay up. I believe we are on the cusp of seeing more differentiation in feeder cattle and calf values than we've ever seen in the industry.